Okay, so for this week, we're going to get into lab 4. So this is the start of chapter 3, where we're going to start getting into decision structures. So basically setting a program up in such a way that you can actually make choices typically based on some kind of user input. So that'll be kind of the focus for this lab. Is we're going to be looking at more user input and then allowing the computer to make certain types of decisions based on what that user input was. So coming over to Blackboard, we'll go ahead and open up lab 4 here, take a look at the directions for it. So for this one, we're going to be putting together essentially a simple tipping app using a combination of input and message dialog boxes, plus things like if, else if, and else statements from kind of the start of chapter 3. So the lab this week is going to focus on implementing that simple tipping app using all the things that I mentioned. So the conditional code that we're going to be focusing on here is determining the amount of tip that we want to leave for that meal. So this lab is going to require understanding how to do things like declaring constants. So there's going to be one constant we want to include in this one. We want to be able to display input and message dialog boxes and write if, and else statements. So it's going to be a combination of some concepts from chapter 2 plus the start of the concepts for chapter 3 from the book. So going through the task for this one, you'll go ahead and create your project or REPL. You'll go ahead and call it something like tipping app and then your first and last name, or lab 4 and your first and last name. And then of course you want to make sure that you're including comments summarizing all of the different key parts of the program. So for the very first step of this one, it's somewhat similar to the first step of the last lab where we were using the scanner class. In this case, we're going to be working with dialog boxes. So we want to make sure that we import the JOption pane class. Once we've done that, in step 2, you're going to go ahead and declare the different variables you're going to be using for this program. In addition to that, you're also going to include a single constant. So see that at the very end of step 2 here. So going through each one of these, I've broken it up into each of the 4 things you're going to need. Sub-step A there, you're going to need a string that will hold the user's input from each of 2 different input dialog boxes. So if you've already finished the chapter 2 content, which hopefully if you've managed to finish the assignment for that chapter, you've seen this already, you'll understand that in order to use input dialog boxes, whatever you're getting from them, so whatever input the user provides you, that's going to be in the form of a string. So you're going to need a string variable to hold whatever input they provided you. For substeps B and C, these are going to be related to each of the 2 different inputs that you're getting from the user. So for substep B, you're going to have a double variable for the cost of the meal. You can go ahead and initialize that to 0. And then for substep C, you'll have an int variable that will hold the user's selection from some set of options in the second of those input dialog boxes. And you can also go ahead and initialize that one to 0. So when you go ahead and first make this double in this int variable, at the very beginning or the very top of the program, you can go ahead and just set each of those to 0 to start off with. And then for substep D, you're going to go ahead and create a constant double. So this is where you're going to make your first constant, just be the only one for this program. For this one, we'll go ahead and use a sales tax. For this one, the percentage is a little bit outdated. Probably should update this for next semester, I think. But we'll go ahead and use a sales tax of 6.75% that's going to be applied to the meal cost. Keep in mind that what I'm showing you here is what it is as a percentage. You want to make sure that when you put this into your program, you've written that as a decimal rather than a percentage. So that'll cover all of your variable declarations and your constant declaration. For the rest of the steps, this is going to get into actually asking for the user inputs and then eventually displaying the output based on the different calculations you'll have to do. So for step 3, we'll go ahead and display an input dialog box asking the user how much the meal cost. After storing the user's input into the string variable, so after you put it into this string variable that you created in substep A here, you'll then go ahead and convert the input to a double and then store it into the variable for the cost of the meal. So again, based on what I mentioned about input dialog boxes in that last video, chapter 2, essentially you're just going to be doing what I talk about there when you're dealing with numeric inputs, where you'll need to first get it as a string, since that's the only way you can get it from an input dialog box. And then you'll go ahead and perform the conversion to change it to the appropriate numeric data type. So in this particular case, you're going to go ahead and change it to a double. For step 4, you'll go ahead and take whatever that meal cost was that you got in step 3, and then you'll go ahead and multiply that by 1 plus the sales tax, and then store that result back into the variable for the cost of the meal. And as a little bit of a hint, I mentioned you can do this with a combined assignment operator. And also as another hint about this one, in the input dialog box video, so the last video, chapter 2, I actually used as an example of how to do calculations with the user's input. I actually do something that looks pretty much identical to what you need to do here. The only real difference there is that instead of being like a meal cost, it's just like essentially just an arbitrary price for some item. But the math that you see in that video is pretty much identical to what you need to do in step 4 here. Then for step 5, so this is the part where we're going to start kind of moving into the conditional code for this program. So for step 5, you'll go ahead and display your second input dialog box, which is going to ask the user to select from one of 3 options. So the 3 options that they can choose from are to leave a 15% tip, leave a 20% tip, or if you don't want to have to worry about change or anything like that, you just want to leave some number of bills, then the third option is to just round to the nearest dollar above 15%. So after storing the user's input into the string variable, you'll then go ahead and convert that input into an int and store it into the variable for the user's selection. So that second part that I mentioned there, that's pretty much identical to the second part of step 3 up here. The only difference is that in this case, you're dealing with the int data type, whereas in step 3 back up here, you are dealing with the double data type. So keep in mind the different data types that you have to use for each of those steps. Okay, so once you've got that, based on the user selection, you'll go ahead and choose from one of 3 options by using if, else statements. So if the user enters 1, this means that they are leaving a 15% tip. Else if the user enters 2, this means they are leaving 20%. Else, if they didn't enter 1 or 2, then they must have entered 3. This means they are leaving the nearest whole dollar amount greater than 15%. So to give you an example of what that means, if the meal with a 15% was something like, let's say $15.26, instead what they're going to do is just leave $16. Okay. And then in step 7, I kind of break down what the math for each one of those 3 different options from step 6 should actually look like. So for options 1 and 2, so that's referring to parts A and B of step 6, you'll go ahead and multiply the cost of the meal by 1 plus the specified tip amount, and then store the result back into the variable for the cost of the meal. If that sounds kind of familiar, it's pretty much the same math that you had to do for step 4 up here. The only difference is that instead of dealing with this 6.75% sales tax, instead you're dealing with either a 15% or 20% tip. So you just have to change that little number there, but otherwise that line of code for each of those parts looks pretty much the same. Then for the last one, for option 3, so it's referring to part C of step 6. In this particular case, you're going to multiply the cost of the meal by 1 plus the 15% tip amount, and then you're also going to use the math.ceil method. This is the one that allows you to round to the nearest whole number greater than whatever decimal amount you have. You'll use that method to round the result up to the nearest whole number. One thing I'll note is that because of the fact that you have to use math.ceil, it would be a little tricky to try to do this one with a combined assignment operator. So probably you won't be able to do it in that particular one. But for the other 2 options, plus back in step 4 up here, for all of those, you should be able to do it with a combined assignment operator. And then finally in step 8, after calculating the total cost of the meal with your sales tax and your tip, you'll go ahead and include a message dialog box stating the total cost to the user. And then the rest of the directions, before we get into the criteria, I just include a couple of different samples of what your different input and message dialog boxes should look like. So these two right here are going to be your two input dialog boxes needed for this program. So the first one is just how much did the meal cost. The user can then just go ahead and enter that amount right there, push OK, and go ahead and move to the second input dialog box, say enter the number of your choice for the tip. So then they'll just choose either 1, 2, or 3. I'll go ahead and type that in right there and push OK. And then it'll move on to the message dialog box at the end, and it will do the calculation based on which of those options they chose. So for this example, the following are going to be examples of the message dialog box for the total of a meal that costs $9.99 before tax if the user selects options 1, 2, and 3 respectively. So the first instance of this message dialog box is if they selected option 1, so this is with a 15% tip. In this case, the total cost of the meal is about $12.26. For the next one, this is going to be with the 20% tip. So the total cost of the meal is about $12.79, or technically 80 cents if you round up. And then for option 3, this is if they round to the nearest whole number, then the total cost of your meal is $13. Okay, so then for the last thing here, we're going to take a look at the criteria. So the comment summarizing the program is going to be worth 5 points. Properly importing the JOption pane class is going to be worth 3 points. So that's step 1. Proper declarations of the 3 variables and your 1 constant are going to be worth 3 points each. That's going to be everything from step 2. It's 12 points total. The input dialog boxes and proper conversions of data types are going to be worth 15 points each. That's 30 points total since there's 2 of those. That's referring to steps 3 and 5. Calculating the cost of the meal with tax is worth 5 points. So that's referring to step 4. The if statements and corresponding calculations are going to be 10 points each, with an additional 3 points for properly using the math.ceil amount. So that's going to be 33 points in total for steps 6 and 7. And then the message dialog box with the proper amount is going to be worth 12 points. That's referring to the last step, step 8. Okay, so that'll cover everything for the directions. Next, I'll go ahead and switch over to REPL and just do a quick real-time demo of what this lab should look like, with me just kind of going through each one of the input dialog boxes and then getting that final message dialog box. But before I switch over to do that, does anybody have any questions about the directions so far? Okay, so if there's no questions right now, I'll go ahead and switch over to this. Okay. Go ahead and run that.
Sorry, just very quick. We're doing everything on REPL again.
If you want to do it through REPL, you can do it that way. If you'd like to start doing it through the IDE, you could do it that way as well. In my case, I'm just doing it with the REPL right now, since I need to make sure that once I put NetBeans on my Mac again, that it doesn't break this time around. I don't know, for whatever reason, it doesn't like it. It's probably because it's old.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so now we've got the first input dialog box being up here. So the meal cost, we're going to put that in. It's going to be $9.99. Go ahead and push OK. That'll then go ahead and take us to the second input dialog box. We're going to enter the number of our choice for the tip. So choose from options 1, 2, and 3. So for this first one, I'll go ahead and just do option 1, push OK. And then it will go ahead and display that the total cost of your meal is, and then that roughly $12.26. And push OK on that, and then that'll complete the program. And run that again. And wait a couple hours for it to actually compile and run. Once the meeting is over, so if everybody leaves before what is it, 12:50 or by 12:50, whichever of those things comes first. I'll go ahead and get the recording and then have it added up to YouTube within about, what would it be, about 15 minutes. So yeah, so it should be available by 1 at the latest. Okay, so now we'll go through the second one. Put in our $9.99 for the meal cost again, push OK. Go with option 2 for the 20% tip. And for this one, now we can see the total cost of your meal is $12 and about 79 cents. Since we're using the 20% tip instead, push OK to complete that run of the program. And then we'll go ahead and run it one more time, wait a couple more hours for it to finish compiling and running. $9.99 for the meal cost one more time. Go with option 3 this time and push OK. And now we see the total cost of our meal is $13, but I wanted to crash just before it. What? No. I'll not worry too much about that right now. If it'll run again in a second. I don't know what's going on now. Okay, so yeah, so for option 3, for anybody that was able to catch it before it decided to crash on me, it was $13 for that one. Since it was the $12.26, I'll just use these to kind of explain it. Since the option with 15% gives you $12.26, it rounds that up to this $13 that we have right here. So that's how we get each one of those different outputs for it. Okay, so that's going to cover everything for the directions in the demo. So once again, I'll just double check. Does anybody have any questions so far about the lab this week? All right, so if there's no questions at this time, I'm just going to leave the rest of the lab time for you guys to be able to work on this week's lab. If you have any questions as you're working through it, you can go ahead and ask me. Otherwise, if you're content with everything that you've seen between the directions and demo, and you don't feel like you're going to have any questions right now, then you're free to take off.
When is the recording going to be posted after the class ends?
One more time, what was that?
The recording for the lab, are you going to post it after the class ends?
Yes, it'd be,
okay.
I want to say it's like 15, 20 minutes after it ends.
Thank you.